order our budget study session number 2. Madam Clerk, can we please start with a roll call?
Councilmember Drew.
Here.
Councilmember Nickel.
Here.
Councilmember here. Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Here.
And we have no Mayor Boyles this evening.
Very well. The usurpation is complete. Who would like to lead the Pledge of Allegiance? I nominate Councilmember Nickel.
Okay, please rise. Right hand over your heart, ready, begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Nickel. Madam Clerk, do we have any public communication today?
I don't.
Anyone from the public? Seeing none, City Manager, I will turn the floor to you to begin the budget study session and provide the architecture of our meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. And as you stated, yes, this is our budget study session part 2, and continuation from our last session, of course. And I'll actually just turn it over to our finance director, Joe, to kick things off. And we've got a number of things we'll be discussing, obviously, and the department heads are here, as well as myself, for any questions that come up during the study session. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel and council members. So we do have 3 to 5 p.m. scheduled for this budget study session. Hopefully we can get through the whole thing. So this is where we left off 2 weeks ago. The IT initiative, Mr. Mallory came up here and talked about each of these points. I do want to point out there was a change on item number 3, so bullet point number 3 up there. Review possible solutions in Smoky Hollow area for internet service provider potential. Before it said study, so the study's already been done, and now staff is looking at what the options are. So budget appropriation assumptions. We did make a change here. So 2 weeks ago, we reflected 14 full-time positions that were frozen. So we identified 14 full-time positions. We'd like to take a different approach. Instead of pigeonholing those specific positions, coming up with a vacancy rate that achieves that same savings. So a 5% vacancy rate built in to each of the department budgets would achieve that same thing, $2.5 million in reduction to salary and benefits, and that's the equivalent of that 14 FTE positions that were identified previously. And that gives, and I'll use my department as an example. So I did have 3 of my staff members leave this year. I still have 3 positions vacant. 2 are in recruitment, and 1 may or may not be frozen. But that gives me, as a department head, the flexibility to adjust my operations as staff is leaving to kind of reorganize my department. And for instance, if an accountant position was frozen, and now I want to fill that, because the second accountant became vacant or whatever the situation is, that really pigeonholes me as a department head. And coming up with that vacancy rate, which is highly achievable, each department has been running anywhere from 10 to 12% vacancy rate the last 6 years that I've been here. And that hasn't changed. We're currently at about 21, 22 vacant positions. We have, at least that I know of, 10 people ready to retire by June 30 or leave the organization. So we're going to be back up into the 30s, which brings us back up to about 11% vacancy rate. So this has been continuous. We fill the positions, people leave, fill, people leave. And we've been continuously about a 10%, so that 5% vacancy rate.
Can I ask,
is realistic.
Is this curated by each department head, or will HR be looking at our overarching staffing rate?
So as each position becomes vacant, HR, myself, the city manager, and the department head will review that position and the need. Is there a need to fill it? Is there a need to do a reorganization within that department? That vacancy's there, that gives that department head that opportunity to look at that. So that will be discussed before it is decided whether it will be filled or
Because I
not.
think you see the direction we would head on that was if we have a lingering 10 to 12% vacancy rate, are we underfunding that position so we're not getting candidates, or is it a surplus position we can reallocate in the organization?
There was, I think, a lot of factors. One is we had a lot of employees eligible for retirement that have been retiring. So our general population now within the city, it's starting to decrease. The age is getting younger, which means we're getting a lot more new recruits that will be here longer. HR in the past was not, didn't have full capacity. Rebecca is now at full capacity, so she's able to address these vacancies and recruitments as they become open. So I think moving forward, probably 5 to 6% vacancy rate is probably going to be more realistic where we are at right now.
So real quick, one of the things we'd asked about was we've come up with our new strategic plan goals, and as we bring on and determine what headcount we need, are we asking, do they satisfy or help us satisfy those goals?
Correct.
Is that component of that process in place?
So that has been in place. We had this vacancy review committee with the previous city manager. That's been in flux. We've got that back in process now. So it's the city manager, chief financial officer, HR director, and the department heads that have the vacancies will meet and have that exact discussion.
And I think the other component was if they're revenue generating positions, we can also make sure we're looking at not hiring those revenue generating positions because they can pay for themselves.
Correct. That is correct, right. Okay. So new budget requests. So this was brought up during a strategic planning workshop back in April, I believe it was. It was also brought up, I think, last budget study session 2 weeks ago. And so here it is again, request for a new position, receptionist. As the public walks into that main entrance in the quad area, so they're walking into our new one-stop shop for development services, so your planning needs, any public work needs, permits that they issue as well as business license, utility billing, and film permits. That's also in that same location. So the receptionist desk is, when you first walk in, that's what's going to be there. To fill that position, it would be an office specialist one at $78,000. And again, this did come out of the strategic planning workshop. This position would report to the city manager's office. Without that, with the new design that is almost done, it will be a little awkward when someone walks in that front through those doors. If you're off to the left, that goes down that long hallway to a door that will be locked, which then leads to HR, city manager's office. If you go straight, that will lead to the new one-stop shop counter. But there may be some confusion when someone walks in and is not exactly sure where to go.
So if I can just add, this person at the entry will also be answering phone calls.
Yes.
Will be, potentially sorting and delivering mail, greeting visitors, directing visitors, also act as, not necessarily security, but be able to guide, for maybe even, offer a visitor's badge, for instance. We may look into that for someone walking into City Hall. And then, just generally responding to customer inquiries. So it's really kind of the central point when someone comes to City Hall for all of those efforts. I mean, right now, calls that come to City Hall go, I think, to someone in Joe's shop that has another job to do. So I think for the amount of output and product we will get from this position, it'll be very helpful for the flow of information in City Hall. And just add that to the equation.
Yeah. It will definitely add to the customer service experience when someone is visiting City Hall.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I'm still struggling with this position. We have a website, that can give a lot of information. We could put a kiosk there. I mean, we're struggling with money, obviously, in our parks and recs and our putting into our CPI, capital improvements, and I'm struggling with hiring a full-time person for this position. I'm just not sure if it shouldn't be a part-time position, or should we outsource it to a security company? It seems like a jack of trades, jack of everything, and the job description doesn't seem really well just thought out. I don't know, I'm struggling with this position.
I would say, Carol, I am too, to a certain degree, but I felt while reviewing this yesterday, I just started thinking to myself that at some point, us as the board, maybe we shouldn't get into the weeds, and if, the department heads and the city manager that we trust are asking for this, maybe we give it with a bit of a leash, right? And say, okay, if we're to give you this, we would love you to report back in 6 months. Are you seeing the production out of this position, or are you like, yeah, it was the wrong piece for our puzzle?
Right.
And can we back it out?
Should we do a temporary, can we bring on a temp for it?
This is what I know. What I know is I'm not here as much as you guys are here. I don't know how often the phone rings. I don't even know what the bag of mail looks like that we get, right? So many of these things, I think there's so many little details of how this wheel turns that we don't understand. And so I took a step back and said, you know what, I'm gonna support staff's request, but I'm going to say, please, come back to me in 6 months and let me know, is this working out or is this not working out? Because if we are to be stewards of this money, and we're trying to be more efficient, we're trying to put in more processes and technology to fill these gaps to save us money, that I would just hope that you guys are understanding our position and what we're striving for, and that you're going to try to put that into place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Mr. Nichols' comments. I do believe that in the end, we're a service organization, and when someone comes in there and doesn't know where they're supposed to be going, which I think does happen probably more often than we care to realize, I do think it's important as a small community to have that little bit of a personal touch. My question to you, Daryl, is it potentially a position that could be filled from someone that's currently employed in the city?
Certainly. I just say that without knowing from the departments who could be, who could fill the position, but it's not, yes, we can certainly look at that as an opportunity for someone internally.
Yeah, and so we've had that desk filled probably for the last 2 years. We did have temps in there for a while, and then since the construction started, we let the temps go, and we were rotating our full-time staff since they weren't at their normal desk areas because of the construction. So for the last 2 years, someone has been sitting there, and I know there was a period of time that I think we had trouble getting the temps to show up to work, and so there wasn't someone there the whole time, and we were starting to get complaints that went right to the city manager's office, that there wasn't someone there directing them.
It's possible this role, if this is someone who sticks, right, that they matriculate to a different role in the city, and by then, if we progress to having robot receptionists, we can go to that. I do think that if we're going to break out a person who is going to be funded, again, by water and wastewater, which are very sensitive, where we maintain to people, we do not keep a slush fund.
I took it up.
You took that, it's not going to be funded at all by water and wastewater?
No, so maybe in the version you have is the older one.
Slide, I just wasn't sure if that was to try and avoid me, or
No.
if that's...
No, sir. Absolutely not.
Both can be true. But, so
it'd be general fund.
it is general fund?
Yes.
Okay. It's okay to fund it with wastewater, we just need to make clear that here's how much value they're adding to wastewater, and it can't all be telling me where to put my water bill, which is 40% of this person's job. 'Cause I put it in the
No,
wrong place.
it was probably would end up being about 5% water, 5% previously.
Okay.
5% wastewater and 90% general
It's not
fund.
any longer.
No.
Okay.
It's a de minimis amount, so we'll just put it all in
That's me
general
playing
fund.
the George Hoops Memorial card right there. Okay, continue.
Okay, and then the next item is the Parks Division. So in the current budget, we moved the Parks Division out of Community Services and put it into Public Works. We tried that out this year, and there was a lot more business efficiencies and business continuity when it was under community services. So we're going to move that back under community services for next year. It's budget neutral, it's just where it's reporting to.
Budget neutral, but not watered plants neutral. And I say that that's not, I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but I don't know how much, we made that move was made because landscaping was dying, because of the lack of expertise for community services to apply that. So we saw a lot of material benefits aesthetically and in those, but again, to Councilmember Nichols' point, not necessarily understanding the inner machinations of how those fit together. So I put that cautionary note out before I will yield the floor.
So I remember Elias, your predecessor, he didn't want anything green. If it was green, he did not want it in his department. He wanted nothing to do with it. I mean, I remember there was a time where the people were setting up for the art walk and they punctured a pipe outside the fire department. And, you know, and I'm calling Greg, the city manager. I'm like, we got to get, Ken here, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, well, is it in the grass or is it in underneath the parking lot? And I said, well, it's 1 foot from the parking lot underneath the grass. He's like, oh, well, that's Parks and Rec. You got to call Meredith. And I remember thinking how inefficient this was. And I think that there's a way, Chris, to your point, that if it's green and it's on Main Street and you can't throw a ball or kick a ball on it, I could see that being under Public Works. But if it's in the park where programming is happening and there's a ball being thrown and kicked on it, and people are enjoying themselves, and that should be under Parks and Rec. And the reason why I popped up is, I don't know how you guys feel about this. I'm an alumnus of Parks and Rec Department, and whenever I see those poor souls wearing those sweatshirts that say community service, I feel like when I think of community service, I think you got in trouble and you have to go pick up trash on the freeway. Community service. And I get it, there's an extra S there, it's services, but it's Parks and Recreation. There was so many wonderful logos with Parks and Recreation, and now we're blue sweatshirt community services. And if we're going to be an employer of choice and a place that, people want to come work, I don't want to work for community services. I want to work at Parks and Rec. I mean, when you go to college and you get your degree, are you getting your degree in community services? Or are you getting your degree in recreation and parks? You're getting your degree in recreation and parks, right? So I would also say that I would love to change that name back. I don't know if I got support on that or not.
Before we go to the sweatshirts, I do remember vividly when this was transferred over. And the reason why it was transferred over is basically what Scott just said. Mm-hmm. That cannot happen if you're going to do this. Because if we're doing it because it makes more sense on the accounting ledger, it's not the right reason to do it. So, Elias, I'm sorry, I'm going to call you out, but because you weren't here for when all this happened. But the other thing that happened is that the Park and Rec's community services person had control over everything. It was a huge job. And when one person has that much responsibility, things fall through the cracks. And we are a town that runs on services and parks and things like that. So if you're telling me that from an efficiency standpoint, that this is the best thing to do and not just a financial standpoint, I can get behind it. But that being said, if things start falling through the cracks, it's going to be agendized.
Yeah, so this actually came, not from me. So this came from Mr. Sassoon and Mr. Jones. So I don't know if either of them or both of them want to come up here to talk about it, but.
So the other thing we have to be cognizant about also is we merged the library with Parks and Recs. Mm-hmm. And the reason why was we wanted the person that's over library and the community service group is programming focused.
Right.
And so the maintenance focus was under Public Works. So now that's why the separation. So we had one person that was focused on programming, development of programming, and the other person development on upkeep and maintenance. And by moving this back, what are you doing with the library? Because now this person will have library, Parks and Recs, and the maintenance. I think that's a bit excessive. And so if you're gonna do one thing, it's a domino effect.
John, come on down.
If he comes up here and says, "Don't worry, I'm a temp," I'm gonna throw a pen at him.
You know, Council, I think you raised a lot of great questions, but I can tell you with today's paradigm on how things are running within our operations, it's not unusual to see library services, recreational services, park services, and even cultural services under one banner. I tend to agree with Councilman Nickel about the fact that the titling is a little clunky. Nobody understands what community services is, and we have that in Torrance. It's very confusing to the outside user, but it gets to be too long of a title if you're going parks, recreation, libraries, but you know, in Torrance we had cultural services too. So my discussion with Elias when I came here was, why isn't park services under the community services title? Because it doesn't make sense otherwise. I fully appreciate that, you know, we do want to make sure the public right-of-way areas are addressed and make sure that they're not a park, but they're green and they still need to be managed. I've got a commitment from Elias, and I know I'm a temp. I'm only here another month or so, but I believe firmly that Elias has the understanding and commitment and prioritization that nothing's going to change in terms of the operations, and you will still see nice landscaping along the walkway areas.
Is it possible, and Elias, I don't want to put you up here for the Star Chamber, but the answer to this reorganization may work, but perhaps just within the departments jurisdictionally, we decide what's Department of Transportation and what's Parks and Department of Forestry, or how we're going to delineate these things in the federal world. So if you have public right-of-way and make sure those baskets are still watering the flowers, we'll be happy, and those things can be sorted out on a man-hours piece.
Right.
And I think there's probably an organizational decision to be made about how to title things. That may not, I don't know if we need a budget line item for sweatshirts on it, but I think that's appropriate. No, I mean, I'm being humorous, being flippant, but I do think that dead on, when you see community services, it looks like it should be an orange jumpsuit on the side of the road as opposed to people who are providing a valuable service. So,
Yeah.
I'm just, again, we're not supposed to get into the weeds, but I can't help but draw on experiences that I've had with the various departments. And I think to myself, like, okay, currently down the left field line at Bredfield, there's a pole that has lights on top of it, at the bottom of which has the access panel for the wires, high voltage, I would assume, covered in duct tape, and the duct tape is worn out from the sun, and now it's exposed again. You know, and it was late last season when we had a light pole fall because it was rusted at the base at the Little League field, right? I mean, if you go around the park, you see all these things. And so I always think to myself, like, gosh, I look at that and say, that's a public works thing. I get it, it's at the park, but we have teams from Public Works that deal with this around town all the time. And I would hate to think that we are so inefficient that we need a team at the park and a team for the rest of town. Like, why can't the town team, isn't the park not in town? That's what I've never quite understood, why the guys that are changing out, like, the lights on the tennis courts are different from the guys that are working on stuff in Main Street or around City Hall. Right. Like, I don't get it.
Right.
Well, let me just, you know, parks, even though they seem like a simple issue in communities, they're extremely complex and they're extremely heavily used by your community, and the community has eyes on them all the time. You know, the park buildings, for instance, we always have support from Public Works on management of, painting of, repair of, that kind of thing. The park services team that is out there managing the parks are really focused on the landscape focus and the irrigation focus and maintenance and management of the turf and landscape. So we have to call upon, and we have to rely upon very heavily upon Public Works to service our facilities, service electrical issues that might be in play, paint, that kind of thing. So the key here to success is really about cooperation. And we are the same city team. And I fully get that. And I'm confident, you know, my few months I've been here, Elias understands that too. So this is imperative that as management changes in your organizations, that there's a real strong culture developed that we're here one for all, and we support each other. So with that, I'll let you carry it on, if necessary.
Yeah. Just to add on, the reason that I think this is going to help is because, frankly, in terms of programming and accommodating different teams and what we do at the rec park, it's always the best that the guys that work together stay together and work with each other and accommodate one another. In some of these issues that we've had, including, for example, the scoreboards, the lights, and all that. I found myself sometimes to directly go to the staff that works for the other department. And it makes it a lot easier if the superintendent who's in charge of the maintenance of those facilities be in touch with his colleagues on daily basis for programming, for the need, for all of that stuff, rather than everything comes to me and me going back to them. It just makes it a lot easier for coordination purposes. Public Works still will continue to provide all the support with respect to electrical and other things that are needed. But a lot of the coordination that needs to be done in the same area where it used to be Rec and Park. And it makes it much more efficient and makes much more sense. In fact, the input came from the staff themselves. I'm not really forcing this, but I heard from them, and we had a discussion, and they also believed that they need to be part of where they used to be.
Okay, Elias, I think we trust it. I just think we just wanted to let you know what we feel the pain points were and what they will be, and it's up to you all to figure out how to manage it.
Right.
Is that, I don't mean to speak for everybody, but.
Councilmember Nichols?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go as to say this, like, there was a sprinkler head broken at Brett Field, creating a swamp for 4 months before I, lack of better terms, piss and moaned, and got the city manager to walk out there and step in the swamp with me, right? For then it to finally be discovered by Parks Department that, oh, hey, well, that sprinkler's not rotating, it's sitting in the same spot, and it's stuck. And so their alarm bells go off in my head, because it's like, okay, well, if this team is supposed to be hyper-focused at the park, how does something like that happen, right? I mean, if there's a team hyper-focused at the park, anytime anyone from the community or anyone from this diocese to say, hey, Mr. George, this is like, look what I see at the park, right? It's like when I sent you the video of that main at the campus leaking. It had been leaking for weeks. I waited 2 weeks, didn't say anything, finally said something, and you were like, oh, thanks for bringing that to my attention. It's like, don't we pay people to be at that campus field every single day? Like, who has eyes, and what are these teams doing if they're not seeing these things? And so that's where I'll just put it out, like, however you guys think it's best organized, that's fine. That doesn't mean the expectation of what the quality of the facilities and what's going to be out there, the expectation is not going to change.
Yeah.
Of course.
And I think for me, this change we're requesting tonight makes it easier to know where to go. Like when I got the call, whenever I get a call, do I go to Public Works or do I go to Parks and Rec or Community Services? And now with Parks moving back to Community Services, it's kind of the left hand knows what the right hand's doing. And I think that's gonna help deal with issues like that don't go on for 4 months.
Well, if we're comfortable with this organizational change, provided that we have an expectation for what the service delivery looks like, I think we can move ahead. In the interest of time, just a time hack, everybody, we're at 3:30, so we got 30 minutes left, I think, till we go to closed. Is that right?
No, we got till.
We got till 4?
5.
Till 5. Oh, we got 90 minutes. Joe.
All right.
Get your Gatorade. Honey tea.
So just one last comment on that, it's, because now we're going to be going out to hire somebody for that position, right?
No.
For the director? Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, the
So,
director, I'm sorry, yes.
I was hoping that we could focus on someone that would really bring a lot of programming opportunities, focusing on the programming, bringing the community together, bringing, doing outreaching to the community, finding out what their needs are, really just focusing on ensuring that all of our residents are receiving, have opportunity to come to the parks, enjoy the parks as much as possible. But now by putting the maintenance back in, that's a different hire. And I just want to make sure we're not flipping something before we've actually seen if there could be any benefits. And I just want to put that out there.
Could I answer that for you real quick? I know, I hate to elongate.
30 seconds, John.
Real quick, just be
30
quick. The concern you have is valid, but there's a good number of candidates that have the ability to manage park services as well. If you can bring those together, you're going to make for a smoother operation altogether. So it's manageable.
And I suspect that, you know, if there is some issues that are not working out, we'll address it. We'll come together as a team, the city manager, and we'll address those issues. So the next slide, some additional new requests. There's a small number of positions to be reclassified in salary range adjustments. So city manager's office reclass of an economic development coordinator to a senior management analyst. That cost difference is about $7,000 altogether, total comp. Finance reclass management analyst to senior management analyst. I'm leaving that budget neutral, if council does approve that. I would just like the ability to have either the recruit for a management analyst or a senior management analyst. But again, I will leave that budget neutral with the management analyst budgeted. Development services, reclass principal planner to a senior planner and a part-time administrative analyst to a full-time administrative analyst. So the total all-in cost for that, again, is de minimis. It's a couple $1,000s. I did give you a separate handout, slide 6. So there's an additional bullet point on there that's not up here, but the final presentation that we'll post to the website will include this. And that's fire is asking for a reclass of 2 fire prevention specialists. One would change to a senior fire prevention specialist. So those are additional requests in the budget. Again, very minimal, all these resulting in a total amount of about $15,000 to $20,000 total, all in.
Is that last one just as an effort to provide a promotability? So we have an ability, somebody to promote someone too?
I believe so. I don't know if Chief
No,
Wheat
that's
wants to
fine.
add anything in.
I presume so.
Okay.
I do have a question. So we're in the process of implementing a new system in the development services department. I would think that with that new system, because we're going from a non-system access database to a system, that there should be some adjustment of FTEs in certain areas. Are we going to see that post the implementation of the system?
So I believe that addresses some of this development service reclass, addresses some of that. We also have, I think, slides coming up on code compliance, but I don't know if Mr. Allen wants to address that at all.
Because I'm assuming the system is going to help us automate some task-oriented work and streamline some of the functionality.
That's correct. That's a safe assumption. It will streamline, but it doesn't change the number of people who are required to process what's being streamlined. So, for example, you receive 10 plan checks. They may be processed faster, but it still requires the same number of individuals or full-time equivalent hours to do that. It just happens faster. Short answer.
Careful. You can't say it happens faster, because then that would mean we'd have to recalculate the cost of the permit based upon the time it takes to process the permit.
Still takes the same amount of hours.
Okay.
Just happens faster because they're being processed. So instead of
They're getting to
something
them sooner.
Instead of
Okay.
me physically putting this on your desk and it sitting there for a day before you touch it, it's in your inbox immediately.
Got it.
Good.
Okay, City Council strategic planning items. So we did hear 2 weeks ago about code compliance. So staff, particularly Mr. Allen, we came up with what's on these slides before you. So enhance existing code compliance efforts, creation of a new community preservation division within development services, and this new community preservation division would focus on citywide code compliance. Expand staff hours to nights and weekends, so that currently doesn't exist right now unless we have some type of special event, or if there's a particular issue that needs to be addressed, then we'll have staff come in at night, but that's not a routine practice right now. Indirectly generates additional revenue for the general fund through permit compliance, business license compliance, et cetera. Focus on preservation of quality of life, establishing and building relationship with the community, serve as a conduit and resource to City Hall while out in the field. So this really helps build that community presence and a relationship with the business community, with residents, with visitors. And the staffing level, so one existing full-time equivalent code compliance officer, inspector that already exists. Add a second FTE code compliance inspector and or add 2 part-time non-benefited code inspectors. So that's the business model that we're requesting for this additional community preservation division.
Thank you. I mean, these are the little things that when we talk about, and we'll talk about budgets for public safety and things when people feel that the city is unsafe or things that are disordered. I mean, this is the trash in the alleyways. This is the graffiti. This is all of those. These are the people who are having an unpermitted party in the middle of the Brett outfield. I mean, these are all of those sorts of things. So thank you for adding this.
Yep. Okay, the business ombudsperson. So liaison for the business community, particularly the small business community. Would help facilitate successful entrepreneurial activity within El Segundo. Assist in fostering the public-private partnership opportunities. So what staff is asking is recommend a way to expedite, we're recommending to evaluate this over the next 3 to 6 months. So give the city manager's office a time to evaluate how to best incorporate the functionality of what this position is entailing and see if we can incorporate it into existing staff or if there's a need to bring on additional staff, whether it's part-time or full-time. And after that evaluation, we'll come back to City Council by mid-year or sooner with the recommendation on how to move forward and incorporate this into our operation.
Joe, I think, Darryl, I think the key here is, I know we talked about doing this and it all looks great. The problem is that we got to figure out how to measure it as well. Because if you can't evaluate what, when you add a position like this, we got to figure out what we're actually getting out of it and what that person's actual job is, because they're going to have to be evaluated and judged going forward and going for raises and all those things. So I think before we implement it, we have to have a set of goals and measures as well.
So that I understand, this is 3 to 6 months to plan the role, or we have someone in the role for 3 to 6 months and evaluate it?
Well, I think at this point, it's really, the functionality of this ombudsperson could be absorbed in the current economic development staff that we have, a combination of our staff. So I think we just need a little time to figure out if, in fact, we can absorb some of these additional responsibilities within the current staff, and then come up with some measurements that can tell if it's a success or not, and then come back. So I would say within the next 3 months, we could evaluate the situation currently in the manager's office, and then decide if we can absorb these responsibilities.
Any further questions?
The only question I had, because I talked about maybe doing some type of concierge program for our larger businesses. Is this kind of like the beginning of framing something like that up?
Yeah, yes. I think it goes hand in hand with your concept, yes.
Okay, so the next slide I'm going to have Chief Lee present on, but council did ask, where's the $1 million cut that from fire? Was not in the initial budget 2 weeks ago, so Chief Lee is going to talk about this slide.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, Member City Council. This here is a budgetary proposal for if and when the brownout begins. There is a typo here. This should say 6 months instead of 8 months, but the dollar amounts are correct. So browning out of the engine for 6 months, the O&M and the fuel costs would be $66,000. And then the proposal is the captain position will be browned out for the 6 months with $400,000 savings. And then we have a vacancy in there, so if we freeze one captain position for 6 months, that additional savings would be $225,000. I'm also proposing that we freeze the whole emergency management coordinator division for this fiscal year. That position and duties can be absorbed by the battalion chief, and maybe reevaluate the emergency management division and look at that again for next fiscal year. But I believe that I'm confident that we can still carry on the emergency management duties and then reevaluate our emergency management disaster program here. So the savings would be a little over $1 million with that proposed plan.
So, after speaking with Chief Lee and Mr. George, we were talking about the emergency services, and when we brought Randy Collins on to do our emergency services, we didn't really have a plan. So we brought him on, thankfully, before the pandemic. He put some processes in place, procedures in place, and create a lot of documentation on how to, if there was an emergency. So now that that stuff is in place, the question is, do we need to have a full-time person there in that spot, or every couple years have a mandatory review of the processes to ensure that we constantly are updating them? So instead of having a full-time person there, have some, have a process in place or a plan in place where we have mandatory review to ensure that we're constantly keeping those documented policies and processes up to date.
Any other comments?
Chief, thank you very much. I really appreciate being creative in the things that we were asking you to do. I don't mean to speak for everybody, but I do believe this is the kind of thing that we were talking about, just moving towards the goal, not necessarily having to take a one shot and slash things across the board. I appreciate the creativity on this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to go to a little bit to battle for staffing that emergency management coordinator position, just because I think that it was a hard-fought battle to get that the first time, and we could see the dividends rather than it be a collateral duty for someone who we want to prevent and suppress fires. And it is, it's its own specialization with its own network and relationships and its own skill set that I think led us to be able to apply for FEMA reimbursements, let us know exactly who to call when we had these disasters unfold. I think it more than paid for itself. So I'm leery about gapping it. It's something that there is no doubt one of our senior firefighters can do the job, but it's a matter of excelling at the job as its own discipline. And I for one think that it just, the return on investment on that has just been in the pudding. So I don't, like I said, I don't think we want to get in here and second guess too many budgetary items. That's one that I think, though, that I think we would be we would do at our hazard.
Sir, if I could just speak to that real
Sure.
quickly. Right now, we have a disaster management, an Area G disaster management coordinator. They're recruiting for that position right now. And then I was going to lean on that person to guide me in recruiting the next emergency manager for here, or what the options are. So I'm going to lean on that person that is already funded by Area G disaster management, and then get back to you with a recommendation.
I could get behind that. If we're going to freeze it, I just don't want it to be frozen for a time. It's one of those things that exists on the shelf. I think that it's something that we can gap it because it's just been gapped for 6 weeks now. But I think that we're going to need to fill this, the next budget process.
Well, and also if I can add, there are other measures that the chief and I are working on in terms of potential savings during next fiscal year. For instance, I've already met with the city managers of Manhattan Beach and Redondo Beach on the potential for sharing a battalion chief. Both very favorable feedback that I got from both of them. We've got a follow-up meeting with the chiefs, and we're drafting an MOU right now that potentially could save, what, upwards of $400,000 to $600,000 a year. So that's a way of potentially funding this down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit unfair that this sits on your budget because, you know, much like a Coupa, right? It's something, it's a big city service that's provided that we shoehorn in because it sort of best fits with the fire department. But this is a whole of city, whole of business management position. So again, if we're going to freeze it for now, that's okay. I just want to make sure we have a plan to fill it. And that we're not giving up the LinkedIn search on this because it is a critical piece.
Understood.
All right, so we're going to get into the capital projects. So I'm going to have Mr. Sassoon come up and present on several slides.
Mr. Sassoon, called me Elias. Good afternoon again. The proposed 5-year CIP is under Goal 4, which is develop quality infrastructure and technology. First, I'm going to go over these projects that have been completed or almost near completion. The roller hockey rink is already completed. The City Hall windows replacement project is completed. And everybody seems to be pretty happy with that project. This is going to also save lots of energy, frankly. The Civic Center remodel phase 1 is underway. It's about 75% complete, and it'll be completed in about a month or two at the most. The pavement rehabilitation projects are already completed. The annual sidewalk repairs is underway. It's about 90% complete. The PD women's bathroom remodeling is about 70% done, and the Stephen Field fence repair was already completed. These are the ongoing projects. The first one is Grand Avenue water main replacement. This project is almost 10% done. The cost of this project is about $1.5 million, and by end of this year, we should be able to finish this project. The new sidewalks at 400 block of West Mariposa and 300 West block of Pine. This project, we are going to start the construction in June, by next month. And the estimated cost of this project is about $250,000. El Segundo Boulevard improvements, we are waiting to receive the funding agreement for Metro. This is a $6 million project, which is financed by Metro. $4 million is coming directly from Metro, and the other $2 million is coming from Measure M or Measure R, and locally, basically. Yes?
We're getting an update on that, the progress of that in 2 weeks, is that right? The Park Place? Or the first meeting in June?
This is El Segundo Boulevard.
Oh, sorry, I was jumping ahead.
Yeah. The Library Park activation will be bidding this project in summer, and it'll be done before the end of the year. Park Place Transportation Extension Design, this is the one. The design is underway. It's about 5% done, and this is the one you were talking about. Yeah. The recreational park checkout building restrooms, the construction will begin in July. As you know, we put a stop to the construction because of the pickleball of the festivities going on in the latter part of June. So that project, the recreational park checkout building restrooms, it's about $550,000 project and will be done by end of the year. The City Hall restroom ADA improvements is about 10% done, and the cost of the project is $200,000. the plunge design is underway. We initiated that. The design is almost 5% done, but this is ongoing. Main and Imperial entry, the conceptual design is done. It's about 25 to 30% complete.
I just have one question about the library park activation.
Yes.
We had talked about that, during COVID or maybe pre-COVID. And I have to say the library park is actually now been activated since post-COVID. So I just want to make sure that before we spend money on it, that we just take a regroup and just say, yes, this is still what we want to do, and this is the direction we want to go in. And I want to make sure that that money for that park activation really mostly was art focused, and I want to make sure, are we taking the money from the art fund to do that art? Is that what's paying for it?
Yeah, and I believe I personally looked into this project. It also does a lot of good for ADA accessibility. It provides, frankly, a better way of irrigation, and it's got very positive aspects to it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it doesn't hurt to just dust it off a minute and look at
Sure.
it again with new eyes.
Absolutely.
Because I can tell you, as I drive by down Main Street, that park
Sure.
is very utilized at this time.
Sure.
And compared to where it was pre-pandemic.
Of course. This is really some of the photos. I'm going to go through these really quick. This is the roller hockey rink, which after the work was done. The next is the City Hall window replacement before, and then there is a photo afterwards. We put these blinds, which are really efficient, much more efficient than what we had before. So again, this is the window replacement project. Again, a few photos. The Civic Center remodeling is going on. I think when you go there, this photo is a few days old. We started setting the new tables and desks, and it's already looking good. The pavement rehab, this is before, and then the next photo is after. You could see the difference in the aesthetic and the look of the roadway. So the pavement rehab again on Walnut, this is before, and then the next photo is after. Then on Maple Avenue, before and after. And then on Mariposa, before and after.
Elias, on
Yes.
that Mariposa section, let's just remember for future reference, because I was driving here today and I think about it every single time I drive here. When you're coming up the hill, when you get to the crest of the hill, between Penn and Penn, how it jogs, the line is in the wrong place. We got it fixed from Penn to Sheldon, but we didn't fix it from Penn to Penn. And I just want to make sure, because I had this alarm bell go off and say, okay, well, if I don't say something, the next company that comes and does this is going to put the line right back where it is currently.
You mean the striping?
Where the striping
Right,
is,
okay,
yes.
I'll be
Because
glad.
even when you're going down the hill, if you're heading eastbound to Mariposa, from Penn Street heading down towards Center, I think that line moved north at least 1.5 feet, maybe 2 feet. And so when trash cans are out on the street, it makes for a problem.
Sure.
And it's just something that the streets are your job, that's your place, that's your domain, so.
Well, wait a minute, I thought we transferred that to, no, I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. Be more than happy to look into that.
And then I just had one question. I know
Yes.
they did the front of Center Street School was redone, and there's a manhole there right at the crosswalk that has cones on it. I'm not sure what's going on there, but it's a whole new redesign at the front there, but on that sidewalk, there's a large manhole area that now just has.
It's like a vault, that rectangular vault.
Yeah, so could we just look at that?
Of course.
Now they put cones there, because I guess I don't know, it's like, they just did this whole redesign, and now we got
Sure.
cones.
Put a Volkswagen there the other day.
Sure, be more than happy to. Sure. So the last photo is the pavement rehab hilltop. This is before, and then let's see, the next photo is after. And some photos regarding sidewalks. So there are some uneven sidewalks. This is before and after. Again, some more before and after. Again, some more photos before and after. So at this point, I'd like to return back to you, Joe. Please let me know.
Okay, so the total proposed budget, which council should have in your handout, I believe it's attachment A. Total proposed CIP budget for 22-23 is $22.6 million. 6.4 of that is carryover, so items that were already approved in previous years, council approved it, just have not been completed yet or haven't started yet, so we roll that funding over. And then new projects total $16.2 million. So 8.5 comes from, are funded by transportation funds, 2.8 million funded by enterprise funds like water, wastewater, 1.2 million funded by special revenue funds, and then 3.6 is being proposed to be funded by the general fund. And I'll touch on the 3.6 million in general fund projects. So on attachment A, the numbers represent how it's outlined there on attachment A. So number 29, $750,000 for citywide HVAC replacement and repair. Giving you an example, the HVAC on City Hall and Police Department, I believe it was initially installed in the late 80s, so it's extremely old. It does need to replace. The PD chiller is actually not working right now. There's a temporary solution that Public Works is doing for that. But with the new windows in City Hall and replacing a system that's almost 40 years old, we're going to see extreme savings in our utility bills. $135,000 for citywide plumbing replacement and repair. $6,300 for citywide miscellaneous electrical repairs. $29,000 for exterior lighting and miscellaneous facade. $185,000 for the library elevator. $30,000 for city maintenance yard plumbing. 1.5 million earmarked for the Pludge Rehab Reserve. And last year, or this current year, 21-22, we did fund that by $1 million. And we did receive $500,000 from Chevron. We're anticipating to receive $3 million from the Chargers and $1 million from El Segundo Unified School District. $1 million for earmarked for recreational park programs on projects based off of the facility park assessment report. So the use of general fund unassigned reserves, we have currently about 7.9 million right now sitting in unassigned general fund reserves would be used, we'd pull that, draw down on that to pay for these one-time CIP projects. Any specific questions on
I just have one more question about number 47. Does that include the bathrooms at the checkout buildings?
So I'm gonna have to defer to Elias on that.
The checkout building restrooms is already funded,
Okay.
and the construction begins in month of July.
Okay.
I have a question on 46. So when I look out over the plan here, and I do the math, it doesn't come close to equaling what we need to build it. So how does the program, or how does it start without the actual funding?
So regarding the plunge, the design is underway. Obviously, the construction, there is not enough funds at this time, but as we finish the design, there's gonna be ample opportunities for the city council to decide and give us direction as to what to do next. Obviously, if there is gonna be, appetite to get this project under construction, there got to be other efforts.
No, I guess maybe I didn't word my question properly. All I'm asking is like, what is the process like for you? Obviously, you can't bid out a project if you don't have the funds to pay for it. Am I correct on that? You can't bid out part of the project.
So maybe if I can address it, we do have about 7 million right now. So 2.5 million in city funds, 1 million from El Segundo Unified, 500,000 from Chevron, 3 million from the Chargers. That totals 7 million.
If I can just add also, the design work on this is probably gonna take about a year. So, and when we eventually, when and if we bid this project out, we can bid it out it'll be bid out with kind of subsets, where you can, correct me if I'm wrong, Elias, that, if we've got 7 million, if we've got all 12 million, whatever the number is, we can look at the bid. The bids will be broken down so that we can kind of pick and choose at that point for whatever funding we do have.
Okay, so again, and this is my inexperience here, so that's why I'm asking the question, is that you can't just sit there and say, well, it's gonna cost 14, we have 7 right now, get started, and we'll figure that out. Okay, I just wanna make sure I understood that. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Now, council can decide to accelerate the funding if they so choose to. We do have, again, about 7.9 million unassigned general fund dollars. 3.6 million being earmarked for these projects here in front of you, which 1.5 is the plunge, but if you wanted to increase that, that would be a council decision.
Joe, with 47, that's unallocated. We would allocate that just generally to the park and wait for as we decide what to do with different spots of the park, allocate that money from that fund, correct?
Correct. So that would be put in
It's just a holding earmark.
Reserved specifically for a park CI recreation park projects based off of that facility needs report.
I'm going to throw a stump in here for the last column that the Legislative Accounting Office of the state just published their nonpartisan report on their economic forecast for the next 2 years. That comes up with a $25 billion annual state shortfall. So in preparation for potential recessionary effects, we should presume that state funding that we use to reimburse a lot of grants on the parks are unlikely to come through in the next 2 years if that is in fact the case. So I think we should tread cautiously on, I know we've typically been reasonably wedded to a 20% reserve. That may end up looking a bit conservative if we are heading for that kind of financial dire straits at the state level. So we may think of sequestering slightly more money than we normally would.
And that is an option. Keep it in the unassigned reserves and reevaluate it at mid-year and reevaluate it again next year at this time during
Fundamentally,
the next
even if
budget.
we pulled money ahead to allocate it, that doesn't create staff magically to move a process forward.
Correct. Any questions or comments? Also, attachment A, if there's any projects there that you feel you want to accelerate or move up.
I would ask, some of these that seem tied in but are reasonably in the same category. Miscellaneous electrical, we have 100,000 allocated for 23-24. Is that something conceivably we tie to the current contracts and the current contractor?
Some of them are, and some of them are not yet. So, yeah.
What do we need?
Or do we have projects that need to be done, or those things that's when the life cycle, would we have equipment failing, or the life cycle expectancy will end in that coming year?
6,300, but next year, 100,000.
Yeah, next year.
We wanted to combine it.
We could do that. We could combine them.
I mean, does that gain us anything? Is that work need to be done, or is it just we have service life expectancy issues and it's due to be replaced that year?
Both. There are.
Indecision is the key to flexibility.
Yeah. there are areas that there are improvements needed, and, you know, we would like to get those repairs done.
Is there any appetite to pulling forward any of the plumbing or electrical? It's reasonably small potatoes on this, but we can allocate that money now to be done. If there's work to be done, or if it's placeholders, I would say no.
We could.
I'd rather not. I know that there was a discussion at some council meeting, I don't recall which one, but of having the city actually potentially look into doing some of our own air monitoring based upon our lack of confidence in AQMD and Hyperion to live up to their end of the bargain, and potentially monitoring for NOx. And so that's not on here. And so if that's something that staff's working on and bringing back to us, I would rather be holding some funds back to say, okay, well, what would that look like? Yeah. And I think, Joe, the city treasurer mentioned to me the other day, do we have a UAL again? We don't have any stranded assets, right, from the POBs?
So we do have $1 million UAL that we're going to be pulling from the pension trust to pay for. So it's unfortunately, CalPERS is 2 years behind. So this $1 million is from, previous years. With the issuance of the bonds, we weren't able to, even though we knew this existed, we weren't able to apply that. Unfortunately, we do have to address this $1 million. It's actually $1,015,000. Probably be the last time we have a UAL.
If we would have funded 100% of the POB versus the 95.
95. We would still have to make this.
You'd still have to make this payment.
Correct.
Oh, okay, so it couldn't have been combined. Okay.
No.
He told me that, and I thought to myself, great, we better start saving money again.
Well, no, then we strand in like 2036, and then we anticipate new UAL for a few years that should eat into that. But that won't have a whole bond discussion, but if I remember correctly, I think that's how it plays out.
That's the projection. Now, of course, how the market is going to perform year to year, we don't know, but we're assuming it's going to be based off of the CalPERS discount rate, which is 6.8, going to 6.5 in the out years.
Mm-hmm.
So if that does happen, then yes, that is correct.
Does anyone have any strong feelings about the $4 million of unallocated reserve, or to just leave it unallocated?
I'd rather leave it unallocated simply from the standpoint of there was a discussion at one point, we had a parks assessment, and this company rolled out this multi-generational building. And I'm looking on these out years and I see $400,000 for Joslin Center ADA compliance. And so obviously there will be a conversation prior to those funds being allocated as to, do we keep the Joslin Center where it is? What do we do? Do we rebuild the clubhouse? Because essentially a multi-generational building is the clubhouse. Yeah. They just want to call it something fancy and new, and I'd rather just call it the clubhouse. But that's something that I think we could do, but I'd rather hold this money aside, because I think there's another conversation that we can have on items that may be agendized in the future regarding funding options and how could we fund projects, larger item projects like this, so we're not just, like, the joke is we're saving this money for the plunge, and the cost to build the plunge just keeps growing, and we're not saving fast enough to catch up with the growth of the cost. So at some point, it may make more sense for us to finance the construction of the plunge and then know what our payment is, AKA 1.5 or $1 million a year towards that. So I'd rather hold it.
And if we put this in, this puts our reserve at right about 25%. Would that be
Yes,
where
sir.
it's at?
About 25%.
Well, it meets the goal, and it means when we go for money to build the plunge, it's cheaper. Because better reading. Okay, any other input on this? All right.
I agree with Councilmember Nicholas on the holding it out.
Okay, thank you. So, Councilmember Nicola, you did bring up the financing of capital projects. So there is an attachment, I believe it's D, in your packet. Looks like this. It's a memo from our financial advisor, K&N, to myself. And we're not going to get into this in depth, but really what I'm looking for is if there's an appetite for council for me to bring back a detailed staff report, a staff presentation to talk about capital financing. So if we did, in that front page of the memo, if we did, this is based off a $100 million bond issuance. A 20-year term would result in about 6.3 million debt service per year. 30-year term would be just under 5 million debt service per year. So that kind of gives you an idea on the $100 million bond issuance. If you're going to issue a bond, there has to be a funding mechanism. And then that's what I would like to, if council does want to entertain capital infrastructure bonds, come back and discuss what the various funding mechanisms are that are in this memo, and if council does want to move forward with that process or not. So just a real high level, there's general obligation bonds. That would require 2/3 voter approval to be issued, and it actually gets issued as a parcel tax, and there's an example in there as far as the average resident, what they would be taxed versus the business community, what they would be taxed on that. You can also structure it where it's just taxed on the business or just taxed on the residential. You have some flexibility there. There's Mello-Roos tax, which is also known as a CFD. So there's a detailed discussion on that. Certificates of participation or lease revenue bonds, and that would be if, for instance, if council wanted to fund the bond on the debt service with the sales tax, and we would bring sales tax measure to the voters, and let's just say it was a half-cent tax that would generate about 6.1 million per year, and then we would dedicate a good portion of that to the debt service payment. So that's an example of a lease revenue bond of generating a tax in order to pay the debt service on the bond. But if council does want to entertain the idea of issuing a bond for infrastructure projects, there has to be a new revenue source for that. With our existing revenue structure, it won't happen.
Before you get too deep into the weeds, does it cost us anything other than your team's time to bring something back and have a separate discussion about this type of thing?
No, and I would incorporate our financial advisor would actually come to council and also
Already
help.
on retainer, it doesn't cost us any additional funds.
Doesn't cost us any additional funds.
Me personally, I have an appetite to discuss that at a council meeting when all 5 of us are here. I don't know if you've shopped at Costco lately, but City of Hawthorne is 10 1/4. And City of Hawthorne is loving their sales tax revenue from Costco because they're getting that extra 3/4 of a cent. And I just think that we're leaving money on the table, and there's just too many things that we're tasked with paying for on top of economic uncertainty. And yeah, so I have an appetite to hear this.
I do as well. It's just interesting. We just said that about 10 1/4 when we had when we talked about funding measures, and it was a 4-1 vote against on that one. So maybe it was 3-2. Okay, good. So I agree with you. I think there's money to be left on the table. But I think we just need to know what our options are, and when we have all the options on the table, you can make a better decision. So I agree with you.
I have no objection about gathering the information. Would this take away any of the time allocation we have toward updating our business license taxes? Because that's been an ongoing process for a few years that certainly plays a role in this.
Yeah, absolutely. That would not. So the heavy lifting would be done by our financial advisor. And preparing this, it's just a matter of my staff getting them data, and then they're putting everything together. As far as the presentation, I would lead that with the financial advisor also supporting the presentation.
Because I think if we were going to do something like that, we were a bit at the nth hour of trying to get it on a ballot this year to move away from our manufacturing-based business license taxes.
Correct, and there's the cannabis tax, which is going to be discussed later tonight and open
yeah, that's agendized
this
this evening.
Yes. Right. And one of the items too is you want to be strategic in how many tax measures you're putting on the ballot.
Or none, but it's worth getting the information. Anything from, tip the hand. Anything, Councilmember Pierstick?
I'm good, I'm good. So the business license, that will not be, we're not gonna be able to get to this ballot? in
It's
November?
gonna be tight. I'm working with HDL on coming up with some solutions and
'Cause I know
recommendations.
This has been, since I've been on council, which is now in my 6th year, this is something that we really wanted to do. I just want to make sure we're not kicking it, because I feel, the business models have changed, especially with people working from home.
Right.
We really need to, this really needs to be a priority for us.
Absolutely. Understood.
Yeah, I don't want to belabor it, but the perception of how labor is allocated within our city certainly distorts the way that we play a role regionally. I think there's a general consensus that we still are manufacturing a lot of airplanes that we are not. Okay, anything else further on this, Joe?
No, so I heard the bring us back, and we'll probably bring something back June 7th to have a discussion on this.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I'll go through this really quick. The proposed appropriations for special revenue funds, enterprise funds, and internal service funds. So Cultural Development Fund, the ACC did come before council on April 19th and presented what their proposed budget is. So I worked with Mr. Lee from Arts and Cultural Division, and we just extracted exactly what the ACC presented to council, and that's what's on the slide. So again, this was presented to council on April 19th. Any particular questions or discussion on the slide?
I think you're good.
Okay, special revenue funds, so again, it's high level. We do have transportation funds of about 9.9 million. That's Measure R, Measure M, Prop A, Prop C, gas tax. And most of that is used for infrastructure projects, and it does support some staff costs as well.
Joe, how many years do we have left on the Douglas bond?
I believe it fully matures in, is it 2033 possibly? You don't
That's okay.
mark that word, but it's somewhere around.
550,000 a year going out to 2033, sorry.
Right. Public safety, special revenue appropriations, 1.2 million. Yes, sir.
Oh, no, it's like on the next slide. You could throw the pen back at me.
Other special revenue appropriations, 2.2 million. Senior housing fund appropriations, 75,000. And that's going towards plumbing design and some other design project. So total of all special revenue funds, $13.4 million. The debt service, so that's the Douglas Street gap closure, 545,000. That's the annual debt service. The POBs, 9,770,000 per year. So our UAL without the POBs for this July would have been $13.5 million. So quite a big bit of savings. And that's, again, about $84 million over the next 19 years due to the POBs. Enterprise funds, this is the water fund. Estimated revenues, $35.5 million. Operating budget, 28.5, and vast majority of that is purchase of potable and recyclable water from West Basin. Capital project budget of $3.9 million. Wastewater fund, revenues of just under 6 million. Proposed operating budget, 5.3. And again, about half of that, just a little over half of that is the annual payment to Hyperion. And the proposed capital budget of 800,000. And again, we did remove the lifeguard station connecting to the sewer to Chevron. Internal service funds, so equipment replacement fund, estimated revenues 1.8 million, proposed budget of $4.1 million.
Do we have any sense on what the repayment from the golf course fund to the equipment replacement fund, do we have any early prognosis about the rate of that?
So I will be bringing either on June 7th or June 21st, the adoption of the repayment schedule, the loan repayment schedule. It's going to be roughly about $370,000 per year.
I recommend the 21st because that June 7th meeting is going to be 13 hours long. And have you guys seen that look ahead? Oh, my Lord. I'm going to come up with conflicts of interest for that. I'm going to start selling brownies everywhere.
Okay, sorry, our general liability fund, estimated revenues of $3.3 million. That's all transfers in from various departments, primarily general fund, but there's also some transfers in from the water fund as well. Proposed budget of $3.3 million. Workers' compensation fund, estimated revenues of $3.2 million. And again, that's all tied back to all the various departments. We actually have rates for each classification of employee, of job, and that's, again, charged back to the departments appropriately. Proposed budget of $3.6 million. So both those budgets include the annual insurance, which between the general liability and the workers' comp is roughly $2.1 million, and the remainder is set aside for claims, attorney fees, and so on. So the next steps, citywide fee resolution. So that's our master fee schedule, which I've been bringing before council, adjusting it by CPI for the last 4 years. We'll bring that before council on June 7th. Development impact fees, that was on the 7th. We're moving that to the 21st due to some state requirements that we have to adhere to for publishing. The 22-23 budget public hearing, again, that's going to move from the 7th to the 21st. And then the beginning of fiscal year 22-23 begins July 1st. So that's all I had. I don't know if council wanted to go over any of the handouts at all or any other discussion points.
Joe, I think I was expecting a slide at least on police. I know that there was an increase in allocation or increase in ask, and we didn't really break into any of these things yet. I know the last budget session, it was a slide that said this is what it was, this is what's being asked for, but I don't think we really went through anything yet. So if we're saying that in a month we're going to have an adopted budget and we haven't discussed any of this yet, I think we're going to run into a problem.
Absolutely. So the fire Chief Lee did a presentation how to cut that.
Perfect.
Police department budget, I didn't hear any specific requests from council to make a certain cut. You do have the itemization. I don't know if there's any specific direction that council wants to provide, or.
I think it's a pretty in-depth piece. I just think there needs to be some time to go through it. And again, we receive a lot of these things, and I just actually thought that was going to be part of this, so okay. I'll put that on me. So I guess we will have to talk about it at another time before June 21st.
So to Councilmember Giroux's point, because word on the street is we're at the lowest staffing levels in 20 years.
Yeah, got a lot of stuff put on us right now.
You got any of those emails this week?
I did.
Friday afternoon, 3:30, emails started pouring in. It was pretty prime time for getting emails before going to the gala and everything. But
it was well done.
Yeah, just perfectly placed. But I think it's important that the community that's concerned, that's receiving this information, and is sending emails to us, I think it's important that we discuss it. And the chief comes up and he talks about staffing levels, where we're at. Because one of the slides up here early on, and I didn't want to get into this in depth because I was hoping it'd be answered through the process, was that overall there's 14 positions that are currently vacant, right?
No, currently we have about 21 vacant positions citywide, and that's going to increase because there's a lot of retirements in the pipeline.
Correct. And so I just want to make sure that we, hear the concern of the residents, which I have 65 emails saying they're concerned about staffing levels. So I'd say that's a concern of the residents, and then, hey, can we report back to the residents in a public session as to where we are with staffing levels, maybe a historical data as to how we got to where we are, and how that could potentially correlate with crime statistics. I mean, good luck on that one, Chief Bermudez, but, I think any kind of presentation to the public would be great.
I think particularly because we budgeted in here for there's an unfreezing of positions that previously been frozen for the police department, and if those are going to unfreeze on a given schedule throughout the year, that would be worth us noting. Previously, we've used those unfunded positions or positions where we did not have had budget for to issue the bonus program that has attracted officers. That something has now been copied throughout the South Bay because it's very, very successful. So I would agree that a little bit more on the police budget would likely be helpful.
Well, Mayor Pro Tem, I know you already said the June 7th meeting was pretty packed, but we'll move some things around and prepare the presentation on the police budget on the 7th. So you'll have some time, obviously.
Or at another special session is fine too, if we don't want to jump in. I'm just saying, you have a community now that's concerned that we're not managing things properly, and I think maybe a real look at the real numbers might do everyone some good.
Okay, we'll go back and take a look at things, and if we need to do a special, I'll work with the clerk on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Council.
So to round this out, 25% reserve, we're adding reception. We're going to look for a citywide 5% vacancy rate rather than allocating specific frozen positions. The organizational move with community services and a few freezes in the fire department, a brownout, and the freezing of emergency management are the biggest movers. And what am I missing?
Changing the name.
Well, I don't think we actually voted to change the reserve policy to 25%.
No.
I would like to keep that at 20%. There's going to be more than 20% sitting in there.
That's
Okay,
correct.
I just want to make sure we're not.
We did not vote on a policy change there. We are holding currently 25% and plus $177,000 or something. I'm doing the sketch math. Pardon? Yeah, council continuing on the 20% guideline. We just happen to be overfunded right now.
Correct.
Just wanted to clarify that we're not jumping to a 25% reserve. We're at 20, but there's more money. It's overfunded.
Right. So council did vote last meeting on a 20% reserve for fiscal year 22-23. Yeah.
So waiting for that interest rate to come up.
Sorry, one quick question, just because I obviously since Friday I've been getting a lot of questions on these things. I want to make sure that I'm intelligent when I'm answering. So you mentioned the amount of vacancies currently in the city. How many of those vacancies are allocated to, or is part of police or fire? Let's say police at this point.
I don't know if...
Approximate, is it 10?
Chief Bermudez, I don't know how many are vacant in police right now.
And Chief, when we put you on the spot, just because people are going to be watching this at home, if you could talk about the total allocated end strength, so they know how many sworn officers that we are budgeted for.
Yeah, sure. So, in fact, I just talked to the city manager last week about this. So our department is, we have 62 sworn officers that are authorized for the police department. I know last year the city council froze a lieutenant's position, a sergeant's position, and 2 officers, so 4 total. Each position had an asterisk, so it allowed the police chief and the city manager the ability to unfreeze any of those positions based on needs for the department. At the time, the former city manager allowed the police chief to unfreeze the sergeant's position. And so we remained with 3 frozen positions, which was the lieutenant and 2 officers. We are currently at 57 officers. We just hired a lateral officer from a surrounding agency. my ask to the city manager for this budget was to unfreeze the lieutenant position and the 2 officer positions based on the needs that I'm forecasting for the next 2 to 3 years on retirements. So we do have a number of retirements that are coming up that can either go this year or next year, and that is an area of concern for me. And so, and knowing that information, I would request that I would get my entire staffing unfrozen. So 62 officers, including the lieutenant, and the sergeant has already been unfrozen as of a couple months ago. That is where we stand with our staffing right now.
And do you have a sense of how many you're going to attrit this year? How many retirements? And I know you can't probably see anyone leavers going to a sister agency, but is there a typical fluctuation per year you see?
Well, I can tell you that we currently have, I believe, 7 people that can retire this year, and we have 8 people that can retire next year. And I might have those 2 numbers mixed up. It might be 8 this year and 7 next year. Nonetheless, I know we have 15 by the end of next year, 2023, that are eligible for retirement.
And I don't want to short circuit a future meeting we might have on this, but do you have cadets in the pipeline or anyone in the accessions pipeline?
Yeah, so we do have some cadets that that we are processing, and again, I mean, cadets are kind of tricky because they're limited in the amount of hours and they have to go to school and that sort of thing. But we do have some cadets in the process.
So, Chief, I know there's 62 authorized. I know there's a recommended amount. True, is that, or is it 62? Or were we? I know at one point fully done for about a half a second before we had retirement. So, I thought there was hey, to be fully staffed, considered fully staffed by whatever measures and protocols we use. Is that a higher number than 62?
Not that I know of.
Okay, so then
62.
Gotcha. So,
and if I could just add, we've been at 62 for many years.
Yeah, so this is going way back, but I know during the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, we were at 72 officers. And I don't know at the time I was a sergeant, I don't know exactly the process of how we went from 72 to 62. I know at the time I remember hearing something about, through retirements, through people leaving, we did go down to 62, and I don't know exactly how long that took, but we've been at 62 now since 2009, 2008, somewhere in there, and 62 has been our authorized number since I can remember.
gotcha. And since that time, have we fired any officers? Not that I know of, right? So
Not
we had
that
a
I
lot
know
of
of.
laterals. We had a lot of people leave, like lateral out, or
We did have, I do remember 2008, 2009, it was that time where I'd never seen that level of officers leaving, yeah.
understood. But that was 14 years ago. So what I'm
Yes.
saying is, and let's just say in the past, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, we've had a few transfer in, and I know there was one that transferred back out again. But in general, the vacancies have come up because of, I think, a couple of reasons. Retirements, number one, and number two, look, obviously there's been there's not a lot of people who want to be police officers anymore. There's been a lot that's gone on the past few years. So, part of me is being a little bit sarcastic here, but the other part is I completely understand that it's much more difficult to recruit officers nowadays than it has ever been in the past. So I do know there's a challenge there, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying, we're getting 300 emails in here that are done from a text bot.
Right.
That basically says that there's a 22% deficiency, and I'm trying to figure out where that came from, but that's not your issue, that's another issue, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to understand the situation. So
I can tell you we're at 62 authorized,
Gotcha.
and we're at 57 right now.
Gotcha.
And we're actively recruiting to get to that.
Potentially 15 retirements over the next 2 years, potentially, or eligible for retirement, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so the recruiting process is,
It's full speed ahead
and
right now,
it's difficult.
just like every other industry.
Like every other industry. Got you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that said, do we want to revisit the police budget at either another study session, or or are we satisfied with anyone?
I think I'm fine.
Honestly, with what what the department's up against with the potential retirements, I mean, I'm waiting for the meeting that comes when Chief Bermudez comes up and asks us to rehire that marketing firm that helped us get the laterals before. Because at the end of the day, if we're chasing 15, and on a good year, we can maybe hire 5, that means we're gonna be chasing 5 at some point. If we were lucky enough to hire 5 this year and 5 next year and all 15 retire, we're still chasing 5.
Do we need to formally reinstate that bonus program, or is that something that can be administratively done?
I don't know,
But
city attorney.
that may be a.
Uh-oh, the heavy's coming.
Ears perked up.
As you,
Hold his neck pillow, Joe. He just.
when did we stop that program, Joe?
The 2 years
Okay,
ago.
well, as you might recall, when the council wanted to do that previously, we had to go to the Police Officers Association and bargain to get the ability to offer that program, so we would have to go through that process again. So we can put this on an agenda coming up, and the council can talk about that, or as part of negotiations, we can talk about that, but we will have to approach the POA about that issue.
And how we would structure it. I know that we were willing to accept the risk because of some retirements last time to overspend on that. And I think we had one officer sort of take us up on the moral hazard of taking the money, waiting the year, and then going back and taking another budget to leave, or another bonus to leave. That's a risk that we were willing to take then. We may not take this time. But I think it'd be worth, if we are looking at mass retirements, 7, 8 officers retiring, which may or may not happen, that might be something that's worth re-examining the bonus program.
But I think the question was, do we need to readdress this? And no, Chief, that's all I was looking for, was an explanation, and you're fighting for what you need, and that's what I wanted to hear. So I appreciate that, you clarifying that for me. So I'm good.
Okay, City Manager, I don't think we need a special study
Okay.
session on the department. I think we're satisfied.
Great, thank you.
So would we be safe to say, and Chief Bermudez, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this board giving you what you're asking for? Just so it's on the public record.
Yes, if I can go to 62, I would be, based on the numbers that I have right now and what I need, 62 is what I need.
So what you've asked for in the budget study session, and what none of us are objecting to, is us giving you what you're asking for.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And on a tactical plan, an operational plan that was examined by the previous chief and implemented in 2020. All right, thank you very much, Chief. So our next step on this is the June 7th fee resolution piece, the annual Chris Pimentel raves against our circus fees and fortune tellers.
Yes, so we're going to be taking a look at all citywide fees will be on that schedule.
Waiting on that.
Yes, absolutely. And then development impact fees. So we have various fees right now, like traffic mitigation fees, which have not been studied since 2005. And then some of the other development impact fees were last studied about 12 years ago. So that's going to be a massive change compared to what the fees are right now. And we're going to be working on getting those communication out to the public, to the development community, and to the BIA, which is an important industry that monitors these types of fees as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. That'll be a big, that is a big number out there. We spent quite a while on that, on the Pacific Coast Commons piece, discussing the specific transportation impact fees, I think.
Right.
All right, with that, anything further from the staff, from the council? Then we are going to close session for a 5 p.m. kickoff there. We are adjourned. Wait, save round?
Tracy, do we have to open closed here at 5?
F.
Or, so why don't we open closed session right now so that we don't have to come back in here in 16 minutes?
Can I bang the gavel twice? Yes. All right, we are going to adjourn the budget study session and then open the closed session.
The sooner we start, the better.
You got a few things to talk about, Mark?